Questions 8 through 10. A graph and a table representing the same sequence are given below. So the key is that these are the same sequence. One is in graphical form and one is in table form. Number 8, is the sequence arithmetic or geometric? Explain why. So let's look at my terms. I go from 1.5 to 3 to 6 to 12 to 24. This looks like doubling to me. I'm doubling each time. So is this sequence arithmetic or geometric? It's definitely geometric. Why is it geometric? Because the pattern is to multiply by 2 each time. All right. Number 9, write the recursive definition of the sequence. So what is my starting term? So f of 0 is going to be 1.5. And then f of n, my new term is going to be take my previous term and multiply it by 2. So f of 0 equals 1.5, and f of n equals f of n minus 1 times 2. Number 10 is a little tricky. For term f of n, what are some values of n that make sense to use? Explain your reasoning. So what are some values of n that make sense to use? Explain your reasoning. Okay, so to answer this question, we first want to look at what does n represent. When I plug in a number for n, what am I actually talking about? Well, in this case, n is the term number. So if I'm plugging in n equals 3, that means I'm looking for term number 3. If I plug in n equals 10, I'm looking for term number 10. So that is what n represents. N is the term number. Now, when we look at term numbers, would I ever ask you to find, say, term -3? And the answer is no. I would never plug in -3 for n because I would never ask you to find term -3. Would I ever ask you to find term 1.5? No. I would only ask you to find term 1, term 2, term 3. So what are values of n that make sense? I'm only looking at whole numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. Whole numbers that are not negative. All right, what are some values of n that make sense to use? We're going to say whole numbers that are not negative. Okay, so those are the values of n that make sense. Now explain why. Why doesn't it make sense to use anything else? Because it just doesn't make sense to have a negative term number or a decimal term number. So using negative values or decimal values don't make sense. Why don't they make sense? Because n represents the term number. Because n represents the term number. Okay? So whole numbers that are not negative are the values of n that it makes sense to use. Why does that make sense? Because using negative values or decimal values don't make sense because n represents the term number.